All right, everybody. I'm going to start the webinar now. So you'll kind of hear me getting into my official spiel in just a few seconds. Hey, everybody. My name is Kevin. I'm the training coordinator with the Association of State Floodplain Managers. And I'd like to welcome you to our presentation today, Culverts, Safety Grates, and Mitigation Efforts. It's part of our Cooperating Technical Partners Information Exchange webinar series that we do quarterly. I think many of you are maybe familiar, but if not, welcome to this quarterly webinar series. Before we get into the topic kind of at hand today, I just have a few admin announcements to get through. The first thing I want to just mention is that we've got a pretty big group today, so we're not going to be able to handle sort of back and forth conversation or unmuted lines. So the way we'd like to interact with you all is via typed out questions and answers and comments. And the way to do that with Zoom webinar here is to go to the Q&A feature and just type out any questions or comments you have from anything you see through the duration of the presentation today, excuse me. And we'll take as many of those questions as we can at the end. We may sprinkle a few throughout as well, but we'll have a dedicated question and answer period at the end for you also. So please bear with us if you get a question in earlier and we don't get to it until later. Want to make another note just about continuing education, getting professional credit, stuff like that. So if you're a CFM, you're eligible for 1 CEC for participating, but you have to have registered individually, participate for the entire duration. And we're actually going to have a few polls just to kind of engage with you. Sort of like there's a little quiz feature that we'll be using today. So if you could respond to those, that'll help with getting the credits. And also just last note, kind of with the credits, is that we can't give credit if you're viewing it in a group today, unfortunately. Couple other logistics just for everyone's information here. Again, we do these quarterly and we are kind of always on the lookout for topics. So if you have something you think might fit, a recent presentation you've seen or something really good you think might work for this, you can contact Alan. He's in the Flood Science Center here. So alan@floods.org. Again, if you're a CFM, if you're a national level CFM, in other words, not in an accredited chapter, you'll get your CECs automatically so long as you qualify for that. And we'll also send you a certificate of attendance to your email address so that you have that for your records. And so with that, I'd like to just turn it over and we can kind of get into our topic at hand today. And to do that, I'd like to turn it to Alan Luloff, who's a program manager in the Flood Science Center here with the Association of State Floodplain Managers. So Alan, take it away.
Yes, good day. Yes, we do these. The Mapping and Engineering Standards Committee has a subcommittee that was created by the ASFPM Board of Directors a number of years ago. And it highlights the importance of the Cooperative Technical Partners Program and the value we feel in that effort. And we have co-chairs, Dave Gannett. Well, first of all, I'd like to mention of the Mapping and Engineering Standards Committee, we actually have Brooke Seymour as a speaker today. And she's one of the co-chairs of the Mapping and Engineering Standards Committee. And the co-chairs are Dave Gannett and Daryl Rockfield. Daryl is actually taking a new position, and so we're in the process of identifying a new co-chair. But I really appreciate all the help that he provided over the years. And actually, he was scheduled to be one of the speakers today. We're having some technical difficulties. We're not sure if that's going to happen or not, but hopefully he'll be on here as a speaker today also.
Hey, Alan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We're good to go. Thank you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, Daryl's here. I guess. Thanks. As you can see, the goals of the subcommittee are listed on this slide, and one of the major things we do is we identify training needs, and then we provide this for this information exchange through these webinars we do on a quarterly basis. And over the years, we've gotten to be, it's gotten to the point where we've got a very good audience for these webinars, and we appreciate those that are in attendance. So today, the major thing we're going to be talking about is safety issues associated with culvert grates, but we're also going to talk a little bit about the Missouri Transportation Crossing Improvements Project that Missouri has instituted, where they're actually, I'll let Daryl explain the details on that. Brooke Seymour is going to talk about Mile High crossing improvements, and then Dakota Fisher with FEMA is going to talk about flood hazard mitigation programs that FEMA provides. And then we'll have a question and answer session at the end.
You want to tell us about our speakers, Al?
I'm not seeing the slide for that.
There's not one.
No, I see no slides.
Right. So it's Chris Thornton and Holly Pisa are going to be our first two speakers, and Chris is going to share his screen with his slides. There we go. Thank you so much, Chris. Take it away.
So yeah, you can see the positions they have with one with Colorado State University, Chris is with Colorado State, and Holly is with Mile High Flood District.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be speaking today on this very important topic, and it's great to see how many people are joining us. So go ahead. Oh, thank you. So in December of 2021, ProPublica published an article titled "Storm Drains Keeps Swallowing People During Floods," and the article tells the story of several people that have drowned and disappeared into storm drains during floods, and presents this problem as one that should be easy for us to fix, but that it just keeps happening. The district, Mile High Flood District, started looking at this issue in 2015 when we were contacted by a dad who lost his son, a 17-year-old named Logan Blake, who was trying to retrieve a Frisbee near a culvert and was swept in and drowned. His dad used our criteria to convince Cedar Rapids to design and install a grate. So our research on safety grates started with looking at how and why people enter the water and the conditions that pose a hazard. And it continued with a physical and 3D model to determine the second part, which is how to design safety grates where those hazards exist. So you can look at flooding like this and think it's shallow, right? This is why we tell people not to drive into water. You don't know how shallow it is. This is where someone was swept into a 36-inch unprotected pipe that looked like this. And just note how little headwater depth you might have here. If this was a short driveway culvert, someone might be able to just go right through it and come out a little shaken on the other side. Unfortunately, this was a long culvert, and it had a utility conduit cut through the pipe. And that's where this first responder got stuck in the pipe and drowned. And then here's another long culvert, a 21-inch diameter. And I'm happy to say that this woman's son did survive, but not completely uninjured. And here is another one. And I'm showing you these because they're all relatively shallow, right? And when we see these entrances on a sunny day, they don't look dangerous. All of these that I'm showing either caused injury or death. And then there are some more obvious hazards, and this is one that is not in the Mile High Flood District region, but we are also not without our own hazards. This is one on our Westerly Creek, and during the big floods that we had here in 2013, a blind man with his dog was swept under this grate. There was a 18-inch opening at the bottom, which is larger than our criteria permits, and we've since altered the grate to meet our criteria. This gentleman and his dog both survived, but you can see the journey he took is that red line. It's another long culvert with 3 bends in it. And then we also had in our own region a firefighter that was attempting to help someone that was stranded by floodwaters and was swept into a culvert that, just like that 36-inch culvert, he just didn't know it was there. You don't know that it's underwater. So the ProPublica article said that we're failing as agencies to take simple steps to prevent these tragedies, and we need to survey our systems, flag openings that could pose a hazard, and then install grates on them. And the stories that we have heard, including some that were in this article, are just heartbreaking. They're of children literally slipping out of the grasp of their mother's hands, a woman left holding the jacket of her fiance as he slipped out of it, sucked into a pipe, and multiple people that died at the same location where someone a year earlier got sucked into a storm drain. So in some cases, we've identified these locations and still haven't done anything about them. These are stories of kids playing, people trying to clear debris during an event, first responders trying to rescue someone, people unknowingly walking or driving into water, and people stranded by floodwaters trying to get to a safe place. So after identifying where to install them and where these hazards exist, knowing where and which pipes and culverts need grates, we also need guidance on how to design them. And so we've completed much of our physical model at this point with the help of the Larimer County Dive Rescue Team, who got into the flume at CSU to provide qualitative feedback on what it feels like to pull yourself off of a grate under various conditions. And we also did a lot of 3D modeling with this. And we have agreement between the two, the physical model and the 3D model. And that 3D model really has allowed us to go beyond the geometry of what we did in the flume and expand the scope of this research. And so before I pass it off to Dr. Chris Thornton, who's the director of the hydraulics lab at CSU, you have our first true false question.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. Let me make sure we get this poll open for the group here. As you can see, it's on the slide. You're not going to be able to interact with the slide, but actually just open the poll in Zoom and you can begin weighing in now. So I'll leave that open for another 15-20 seconds maybe. Make your selection, and then we'll all view the results together. Just going to let the last few people weigh in if they have a moment. Okay, I'm going to close it down and let's see what we came up with. So 5% true, 60 false, and 35% it depends.
Yeah, so it really, it depends here. You saw, I showed you some shallow pipes with little headwater on them. And if they're short, you might just be able to go through. But if they're long, or if they have obstructions in them, then you can get stuck in the pipe. So it really depends. They may need a grate. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Thornton.
Well, thank you, Holly. So as Holly mentioned, the need for grates has been well documented, and unfortunately, there's too many examples of why we have to investigate this and provide some sort of guidance and recommendation for implementation to help stem the result of these tragic accidents. Colorado State University, our hydraulics lab is here at the base of Horsetooth Reservoir, so we're able to get very high flow rates. We have a 5-foot diameter pipe that comes out of the bottom of the reservoir and feeds the flume, which is here on this image that you'll be seeing some pictures of. When Holly and her team first came to CSU to talk about this, they had a design for a grate. It was a 3-to-1 sloping grate, had some standards for what the bar spacing would be and the layout of it. So we built the grate and put it in a flume that was 20 feet wide. It essentially was a head tank. We put a 48-inch culvert opening at the downstream end of our flume, installed the grate. And the intent at the beginning was to be able to collect velocity measurements and really understand what was happening with the velocity in and around the bars of the grate and at the sides and at locations where people could be stuck on it. Multiple flow rates were tested. As you can see, we started very low, tranquil flow through the 48-inch culvert and slowly worked up our discharge until we had a submergence flow of about 115 CFS. At each of these flow rates, as said, we collected 3D velocity measurements so that we could really understand what the flow was like around the bars of the grate, and had a pretty good grid set out along the face of the grate vertically, and it was inclined, so it was as we were moving away, and dropped the probe down into the water, sampled for 30 to 60 seconds. And while the results were interesting, the 70 CFS and the 90 CFS saw pretty uniform velocity, certainly a little higher for the 90 than the 70. But at the 115, that swing back and forth, we were seeing a lot of surging, which reason to believe you would see that in the field also. As the water was being sucked into that grate, there was some dynamic head change at the top, and that, of course, influenced the velocity. The velocities were pretty low. When we actually analyzed these, you can see we were in the 2.25, 2.5, maybe 2 3/4 feet per second, and thought, well, okay, that's a lot less than what we thought. We wouldn't expect that to be an issue, but we need some sort of qualitative assessment. We can get a number, and part of the risk is having a number and not really understanding what it means. And so can't put students in flumes like this anymore. So we brought in the professionals, the Larimer County Dive Rescue Team, volunteer organization here in Larimer County that is just first rate. I plug for them. If you're ever in harm's way, they're the ones you want. Super professional, dedicated to safety and mission, and jumped at the opportunity to be able to do something cool, quite honestly, but also to be able to help. I can't even count the number of hours that they spent as a team working with us to try to sort this out. So the first part was for them to see it. They came and inspected what we had and decided we weren't crazy, or at least not as crazy as them, and they would be willing to give this a shot. So we had multiple divers maneuvering on this grate at different flow rates. We wanted to be able to, from soup to nuts, be able to really quantify, or qualify, I should say first, the effect, cause and effect. You have the grate, you have a different discharge. How can they maneuver, not only for themselves, but to be able to rescue somebody else? Brought a body dummy in that they were able to position on the grate and simulate removing somebody that had been submerged. Certainly safety gear, they were well harnessed and protected. Safety diver, you can see waiting for her turn to get into the action, and found that two things. One, the safety grate, this is Mike Reeves, as designed, was pretty effective. The only issue that he found is where he's sitting right now, he realized that it was very difficult to stand straight up. However, if he slid back and stood up, he was completely out of harm's way. And this is at 115 CFS, the design flow. So the need was to be able to incorporate that sort of qualitative interpretation into our test program. So the first thing we thought was, well, there's not any real risk for the diver when he's out on the grate. So those low velocities aren't providing much of a force that's going to pin somebody. So we can use a lot less steel. We took the slope from 3 to 1 and brought it back to 1 to 1 so that we could still incorporate the debris removal. A track hoe could reach down in, grab the debris and pull it up out. But a diver, hopefully, would be able to maneuver on here again for self-rescue and for rescuing somebody else. The other important part, you can see where Jim's sitting here as a safety diver, but that offset at the top. We put an 18-inch offset on that 1-to-1 grate. So we pushed it out away from the pipe just enough that there wasn't that vertical component sucking the legs down into the pipe at that upper position when that grate was submerged. Very confident that the diver's maneuverability was well documented. Didn't have any real numbers for that, just their words of, yeah, this is good. I can move around, I can float on my back. It was almost a big swimming pool for them once we had that grate pulled out away from the entrance to the culvert. I have another little video of our fearless leader trying it also. So Holly was eager to get into her dry suit and see what this felt like, so she could feel what the divers were saying to them and be able to provide her own internal assessment of what that felt like on that grade. Again, this is at 115 CFS. You can see she's able to maneuver around. She's going to walk over to the left side where we had some horizontal safety bars, some other components of the criteria that Holly will share later, draft criteria. You can see once with that horizontal bar that's behind the grate so that the trash can still be removed with the track hoe, she's easily able to step up out of that grate and remove herself from harm's way. So with that, we thought, okay, we know that for a 48-inch culvert at its design flow of 115 CFS, that this Mile High Flood District grate will work very well. But what if? What if somebody doesn't have that configuration in the field and we have different geometries? Holly showed a lot of different pictures of a lot of different kinds of field applications. So we needed to sort of know what the limit was and brought our divers back and put a vertical grate, as you can see in the upper right of this picture, to the entrance to the culvert, and put the team in to see what was too much, kind of like the 3 bears. It's too cold, just right, and too hot. We wanted to be able, at these 3 discharges of 70, 590, and 115 CFS, how could they maneuver? What were they able to do, or what would they be able to do in this type of situation? Now, it's too bad the audio doesn't come through in these webinars, because these Mike and Jim, or Matt and Jim bantering was rather hilarious, but you can see at a lower flow here, 75 CFS, he's able to maneuver fine. He's able to push himself back. He's able to walk back and forth across the culvert. Had some drag on his legs for sure, but around his hip area, he was able to support that load and be able to maneuver. Now, he's in a dry suit, which has a good bit of drag on it, but I would also argue that these gentlemen are more fit than 90% of us, myself included. So I think that sort of balances itself out with a normal person that would be in the flow. The next one was where it got a little interesting at the 90 CFS. You can see the culvert's not even quite submerged yet. And while the diver's able to maneuver around on the outside of the grate, if his legs were to be pulled in when they were pulled through the grate and into the culvert, we have the grate there just to keep them from being sucked through, but to simulate a culvert with no entrance condition at all. Once his legs were pulled in, it was very difficult for him to get them out. You'll see his hand movements here, how he's talking about how his legs are sort of being pulled together into the culvert. And it was very difficult for him to get out. So this is what they considered is not great. This is about where we would be and not want to have to maneuver somebody out of this type of condition. Finally was the high discharge. A little bit more safety rigging. You can see that divers actually went underwater to simulate. Jim's going down now to simulate what would happen if they got pulled under. You can see the surging that we talked about earlier at the top of that. The combination of that and the suction and the weight at the bottom was very uncomfortable. That was their words. There a few other expletives, but very uncomfortable was pretty much the consensus of that high flow. So from that, we were able to have some pretty solid takeaways. First was the one-to-one grate saves a lot of material and expense and was fine from a safety standpoint. We were well within a realm that the divers were comfortable. Really needed that 12+ inch platform at the top to be able to move that grate out away from the entrance to the culvert, where you'll see in a minute the high velocities are being pulled through. And we were able to qualitatively determine a threshold, meaning a discharge in a culvert opening where the divers are, this is fine, not a problem at all. Yeah, this is not, we're not liking this, to no, this is bad. So the next trick was to be able to turn that into some sort of design criteria and expand the test program that we did here at this prototype scale into more geometric configurations. So with that, Dr. Land to the rescue. I've worked with AECOM for a number of years now with combining physical modeling and CFD, and we've been really able to do some fascinating things and really optimize a critical path to solutions for very complicated flow problems, this being one of them. So we contacted Dr. Land and he was eager to give it a try. So he and Jeff Ellis, our laboratory manager, worked diligently to be able to get the AutoCAD drawings sorted out so that Frank was able to replicate in his world in Flow 3D from Flow Science and run his RANS model and be able to first run the simulations that we did physically, and then hopefully, if we could make sense of that, expand our database to include different culvert openings and different entrance conditions. So the first step was verification and comparison. So as I showed you before, we had 3D velocities at a discrete set of points for each discharge. Able to take those vectors, superimpose with what Frank got out of his model. As I said earlier, you can see it, you know, a little far away from this great opening, you can imagine when your legs get pulled into this 14, 15 feet per second, what the diver was feeling and what they were experiencing. So again, the turbulence and the surging would expect variations in velocity. We range between 2.5 to 5, and at some measured point velocities, the 3.2 or so that Frank was able to get was in the right range. We didn't spend a lot of time looking at duration, but fully expected Frank to see that same surging type phenomena in his model that would show the variations in velocities. But it gave us great promise. It told us that, hey, we can now put some numbers to what we're actually measuring in the flume, and now hopefully to what the divers are feeling in the flume. So the next step was just that, to take the vertical grate, which again was simulating our no grate entrance condition, ungraded culvert opening, and superimpose the runs that we did with the divers at different levels of submergence and compute the forces that would be on the back of this 6-foot mannequin, 3D mannequin that was inserted into the Flow 3D, as you can see from this cutaway, flow through the legs, around the torso, a little bit around the neck, but the high velocities here at the back of the legs, pushing those knees in, you know, and holding the diver in place. From that, Frank was able to take the surface area then of that body, the flow conditions that he was able to quantify across the vertical column of depth, and come up with forces. Whoops, sorry. Oh man. Give me 1 second, sorry about that. There we go. And found that at that condition where the divers thought, yeah, this is the limit. I know that the 90 CFS, the 142 is not good. Right around this 107, 108 value is where the divers thought this is where it's okay. We don't want to be past this for somebody getting into this type of condition and have to self-rescue themselves, or we don't want to have to be in this condition to have to rescue that person. So it gave us a value. It gave us a force validated from a qualitative assessment to the quantitative CFD to this value that we could then run similar comparisons against different pipe diameters. So we looked at 5 different models, a 12, an 18, 30, 48, and 60-inch culvert, all inlet controlled, and added the body. For the 38, 48, and 60, Frank used an adult body. For the 12 and 18-inch culverts, looked at a child-sized body, realizing that an adult could probably step out of a 12-inch culvert or even a 18-inch culvert. You get 2D50 or 2 culvert diameters of depth on top of that. It might get a little hairy, but it's the kids that we wanted to make sure that these lower pipe flows weren't getting pulled into the vortice here in the center of the pipe. Also wanted to look at 3 different types of entrance conditions. The first was nothing, just an open pipe, to be able to set the limit for where you have to start thinking about adding a safety grate. The second was precast flared entrances. These are very popular, all different shapes and sizes. We were able to use a local manufacturer. They were kind enough to send us their AutoCAD drawings. Jeff and his team were able to formulate the CAD model that would then go into Frank's Flow 3D model. You can see from these 4 slots for the 18, the 48, the 30, and the 60, the kids on the small one and the adults on the large one, being able to evaluate those grates with the manufacturer's grate on top, or those entrances with the manufacturer's entrance, and then the mile-high safety grate. So the results of that gave some pretty good data. For the 60-inch culvert, you can see right away we're into more than twice, 3 times, 7 times what the diver was able to take. 48-inch culverts at the entrance, this is with no grate in place now, you have a problem. Even at a very low flow, 35 CFS, you're pushing 100 pounds of force on that body, which is getting to be substantial. 60 CFS, again, the divers were 18 inches away. This is at the entrance to the culvert. So at that 60 CFS, which is about a half a culvert full, 250 pounds on that body, the risk of them getting sucked right through is, of course, very, very high. The 30, the numbers here, I'll come back and talk about those in just a second. Did the same thing with the child bodies on the 18-inch culvert and the 12-inch culvert. Being able to evaluate the differences or the forces at each of the entrance conditions and flow rates. So at the end of that, we had a pretty good data set, right? We had entrance conditions, we had flared entrances, the precast flared entrance, and we had the mile-high safety grate, all with the force values that Frank was able to determine for each of the discharge rates. Next trick was to be able to apply this now to the field, right? Again, we had 5 culverts that we evaluated. There's more than that out there, obviously. You haven't got into the box culverts yet. That's to be determined still. But there's a lot of different geometries out there. So we needed to be able to collapse these data somehow in a way that we could draw some criteria out of it. I looked at a lot of different mechanisms to be able to do this and realized that if we looked at just discharge versus force at the culvert entrance, you can see the 12-inch, the 18-inch, 48-inch, and the 60-inch, reasonable trend there. The 30-inch is odd. So the 30-inch gives us pause in that there's either A, maybe something weird with the model that we're not quite getting, or B, we have an ugly combination of head and culvert opening at that 30-inch geometry that just does produce high forces. Come back to what we're going to do about that. But if I take the 30-inch out for a minute and put in our force threshold limit of 110 pounds, we don't want to be past that, you can plot just a simple power curve through these data and find that at about 35 CFS through any culvert is where we're going to see a force that's greater than that 110 pounds. If I look at the flared entrance and do the same thing, again, the 30-inch is a little funny, but the 60, 48, 18, and 12 all fall into line very nicely. We're able to find that we have a threshold of about 115 CFS, meaning that a flared entrance provides safety and a reasonable chance of extraction or rescue up to just over 100 CFS. If we evaluate the mile-high grate, can see we're way below this 110. Even just with that 1-to-1 slope offset 18 inches and that 1-to-1 slope, we're far enough away from that mouth of the culvert that the force is reduced almost by an order of magnitude. Can extrapolate that out to a value of just over 275 CFS, where it would be the extrapolated limit of what the mile-high district rate would be able to protect against. So with each of these, the idea then is to develop design guidance so that it's as easy for the designer as possible, right? It's almost if then. They're doing their hydrology, they're doing their site layout, they realize that they have discharge of X. Oh, where am I on the need for a safety grade? I'm at 25, probably fine, unless you have a deep condition, which is another set of criteria that need to be evaluated. Or I'm at 60 CFS, okay, flared entrance, graded flared entrance is a minimum. Might want to evaluate a mile-high grade. Certainly you get over that 100 CFS and you're going to want to put the mile-high safety grade in. So it's another excellent example of teamwork. The group at Mile High, the folks at AECOM, my team here at CSU, and the dive rescue team. Again, I can't say enough about them. The seamless integration of, yes, collecting data and setting things up physically, but the thought process. How do we evolve this now? How do we get from where we're starting, which we know is not good, to where we need to be, which is safety? And I just have to applaud the Mile High District for making this opportunity available so that we can provide this input on a very, very important design aspect of our civil engineering jobs. So with that, I think there's a quiz.
Yeah,
Kevin,
hey,
that's
Dr.
it.
Thornton, this is Kevin. I think we realized that we may have added this one a little bit too early. And so I think for those of you listening, we're going to hold off on the poll, and then Holly, you prompt me when you're ready and I will launch it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so getting back, how do we apply this in our criteria? And this is what we're having a lot of discussions on right now. We're going to go back and look at that 30-inch one more time, but we are drafting criteria. And so what I'm going to show you now is draft, and there's two parts to it. Go ahead, Chris. The first is, again, looking at where those hazards exist. When do we want to say, you need a safety grade? And so there's four bullets here, and it's really if any of these conditions exist. The first is that you can't see daylight through it. And maybe you can't see daylight because it has bends in it or because it's really long. The second is that conditions could trap or injure. And so that could be like the utility crossing that I showed you, or again, bends. The third is when design flows are equal to or greater than 30 CFS, and that's per pipe or box opening. And that's where Dr. Thornton showed you where that discharge power curve hits the threshold for the force that the diver said, okay, this is the point at which it's getting hard. And then the fourth is, what about these small pipes? Okay, and the one on this slide is a 12-inch pipe, and obviously it allows for a lot of head on it. So this is where 2 lives were lost at this location with this pipe that's unprotected in a detention pond. At some point, maybe you're not up to 30 CFS, but there's a condition there for smaller pipes that could be a hazard, are a hazard. This one is absolutely a hazard. So with that, and this is just based on some of the numbers we've looked at and the ponding associated with this, but when you are, oh, not yet. When you are designing flows for, a 12-inch or larger pipe, and you're exceeding 2 times the diameter with your headwater at the inlet. Okay, so that's when we need a safety grate. And then as far as how to design them, for flows that are less than 100 CFS, Dr. Thornton talked about using precast flared end sections. We modeled the off-the-shelf grate that you can get. These are 1-to-1 or milder, or you can custom grate, build a custom grate. And if you're doing a custom grate, we recommend spacing the bars 5-inch clear. And the reason for that is because some of these cases where we looked at injuries, there were issues of foot entrapment, that someone got attached to the grate and literally could not pull themselves from the bars. And then what about when you're above 100 CFS? This is what Dr. Thornton talked about as the mile high safety grate. You want to offset the top of the grate 12 inches. That does 2 things. It pulls the person further away from the opening where you have really high velocities. And it also allows for someone to self-rescue. They have something to step on, to reach, and to climb out of. Or it helps someone that is assisting someone off of a grate to stand and help. And then incline the grate at a 1-to-1 slope from that horizontal bench to the invert elevation. And then again, space vertical bars 5-inch clear so we don't have issues with foot entrapment, and provide a clear space of no more than 6 inches at the bottom for debris. So there was a question in the Q&A about what about the balance between designing for debris and issues of conveyance, right? So what's listed on the slide is really just criteria related to safety. And we also have criteria that's related to conveyance, right? And so the criterion that we use for that is that in addition to this, you also want to ensure that the open space between the bars added up is 4 times the open area of the pipe or box culvert. That's what we use to ensure that we have adequate conveyance given some debris. All right, now we're ready for the poll question. Oh,
Okay.
and advance one more, Chris.
Bear with me just a moment. We'll get that poll open for everybody. Okay. I just opened it, should be open now. And the question is, what is the maximum flow rate before an MHFD safety grade is recommended? So take your time, read through your options, and go ahead and weigh in. I'll leave that open again for probably 20-30 more seconds. And in the meantime, just want to remind people that, you know, we will take questions at the end. So if you've got questions about anything that we've gone through so far or anything you'll see for the rest of our time, please don't hesitate to use the Q&A feature to send that in.
And I'll also offer, my email is at the bottom of this slide. And I offer that for one reason, because this criteria that we're presenting today is draft. And as we talk to different groups about this, it has helped inform and shape that. And if you have comments or suggestions, please reach out. All right. So what is the maximum flow rate before the custom safety grade, that MHFD safety grade is recommended? And that is 100 CFS. So 30 CFS is at the point where we say that's one of the criterion for saying you need a safety grade, and you can use something that you might be able to find off the shelf. And then at 100 CFS, that's where we're hitting the force that the divers thought was very difficult, and we're doing, and when you design it for the MHFD safety grade, that pulls you away from that. So the answer was 100.
Okay, outstanding. Thank you so much. Dr. Thornton, if you'd like, you can stop sharing your screen, and then I know we do have Daryl is next up on our agenda. Daryl, are you there?
Hey, Kevin. Yeah, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can. So if you have slides you'd like us to see, if you could just share your screen with the green arrow.
Yeah.
Go ahead and try it.
Awesome. So, is it showing up for everybody?
Yeah, it's not in presentation mode yet though. And then your audio is a
All right,
little
there
bit
we go.
quiet. If you
Well,
could
great. Thank you,
get
Kevin.
closer to the audio, the microphone.
Oh, I see. Okay, great.
Thank you.
So again, my name is Joe Rockfield. I previously was the CTP project manager for state of Missouri at the State Emergency Management Agency. I oversaw their program for 5 to 6 years. And pretty much, I just recently took a job with Atkins. I'll be out of the Kansas City office. And one of the projects that we came across back in 2016, 2017, 2018, that wasn't really created or, sent for funding through FEMA, was our low water crossings project. And this was essentially created because we had a bunch of meetings, discovery meetings, flood state review meetings, where we met locals that had their largest problems weren't necessarily the flooding of the residential properties or the business section of their community, but rather the culverts and bridges and transportational crossings that were being washed out after just a moderate storm here and there. And once any disaster was sent in, any disaster was declared, those culverts were getting replaced and put back to the same degree of protection that was just getting washed out repeatedly. And so essentially we've created a project that kind of looks at that and addresses it for the community's concerns as a return on investment for communities and disasters dollars as well. But essentially, we're taking those disaster information that we get from FEMA and looking at the culverts and the bridges and any roads that are washed out and damaged repeatedly, and taking a look at the H&H of the level of service of that road. Our transportational department from Missouri has kind of like regulational guidelines for the 25-year, the 50-year, the 100-year, as far as the city, the county, and the state roads. So looking at that and kind of what level event that bridge or culvert is designed for and what it should be is kind of what we're looking at for all these bridges and culverts that are washed out. And it's essentially what we're creating is the H&H revised for those areas where we'll be able to provide a PA that will in turn be able to pull it off the shelf next time a disaster hits, and that culvert or bridge is washed out again. And from there, they'll be able to essentially take the data and put back a culvert or bridge of what it should be rather than what it previously was, which would help a lot of frustration with communities having those bridges and culverts washed out repeatedly throughout this. And that's just one of the projects we've developed in Missouri, but we found quite a bit of success, and it hasn't been finalized. Nothing's been absolutely final. We're waiting on a lot of the 2D data to be able to run these H&H scenarios, revised scenarios. And once those are complete and everything's moving forward, I think we'll see a lot more progress and a lot more traction on that. But this is kind of open to your guys' interpretation and kind of how you guys look at these kind of problems, whether it's CTP or FBA. Feel free to communicate any of these needs or concerns to your local entities that have the ability to handle stuff like this. But we found a lot of communities are very perceptive of this and very much like the idea of being able to give them equitable solutions to their problems outside of just providing them great maps and models and whatnot. So again, this is just one instance in Missouri where we found traction, and hopefully it sparks some interest throughout whoever's listening on call about kind of what they can do in their areas and how they can tweak it or make it work for them. I assume this just won't be a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, but I'll be sure to include my new contact information in the chat if you guys have any questions. I know this is very short, but I believe it was a 5-minute presentation. So with that being said, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out. And just want to thank the committee again. You guys have been great. Really enjoyed my time here over the past year or two, being able to help bring relative presentations and information to you guys that we believe you guys wanted to hear. And feel free to send us any comments or ideas that you think are relevant that we probably haven't touched on. I believe we're having a lot more 2D discussions in the future and whatever else the committee's got on the docket. So thank you guys for your time, and thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Daryl. Thank you for mentioning the committee work too. If you could just stop sharing your screen, I will take over and then we will go to Brooke. So Brooke, just bear with me one moment and we should be all set.
All right, thanks, Kevin. So on the topic of culverts, I'm going to briefly share a couple things from the Mile High Flood District's perspective that has helped us successfully implement crossing structure improvements through the years. And similar to what Daryl just shared on, the key takeaway I want to emphasize today is the importance of master planning. It all starts with master planning ahead of implementing the individual improvements. Master planning the urban storm runoff system is fundamental for the protection of people, property, and our environment. We need to understand the larger stream system and stormwater network within its evolving watershed. And since watersheds typically cross jurisdictional boundaries, master planning requires coordination and buy-off from multiple jurisdictions and agencies. And to be effective, the drainage master plans need to be coordinated with other planning efforts. So parks and open space, recreation, transportation, water quality, wildlife, and other considerations. I want to point out that drainage master plans certainly go beyond just culverts and crossing structures, but those are important components in almost all master plans that we do. Once a master plan is completed and accepted, it provides the necessary guidance to ensure individual improvements are consistent with the regional drainage and stormwater needs. We often see that drainage projects are actually initiated by other types of projects or community needs, right? So development, parks, transportation. So it's important that the drainage master plan is in place to guide those improvements. And as we know, drainage projects may be unexpectedly needed due to a structure failure or flood damage. Take this example. A culvert gets washed out during a flood and needs to be replaced. You have to respond quickly. Do you go back and replace it the same size as Daryl was talking about? Or do you need to upsize it? Do you want to be able to accommodate a future trail crossing? Is it enough to just install a new culvert or are channel improvements needed? In these types of cases, the master plan will provide the necessary guidance to respond quickly and effectively in a manner that aligns with the future regional drainage needs. In some cases, you may not be able to install the full master plan improvements right away, but having the master plan in place can help us make informed decisions with the future goals in mind. Here's an example. The transportation department comes in with a highway project. The master plan calls for 3 large culverts for a stream crossing, along with channel capacity improvements. But say there's not enough funding identified at the time to implement the necessary channel improvements part of the project. We know the best time to get those culverts installed is with the highway work. So in this case, we may have the transportation department install the 3 master plan culverts, but block 2 off until the necessary channel improvements can be funded, permitted, designed, and implemented. Once the channel improvements are built, the culverts are opened up without disruption to the highway. So now I want to talk about inadvertent storage as it applies to culverts. If you participate in the Future Conditions webinar back in July, this is a bit of a repeat, but I think it's important to mention here. Kevin, could you advance the slide, please? Thanks. For the purposes of floodplain mapping, it is the Mile High Flood District's policy to not account for inadvertent flood storage, which commonly occurs upstream of undersized culverts. What this means is that the regulatory peak flow is not reduced downstream of an undersized culvert. The photos on this slide are from a recent culvert improvement project. In the pre-project condition, the floodwater will be held back upstream of the roadway embankment because the culverts are so undersized, essentially acting as a detention pond. while in the post-project condition, the full 100-year flow is conveyed downstream without obstruction. So in reality, we are sending more flow downstream with this project. However, since the flood mapping ignored the effects of inadvertent detention on peak flow rate, there is no change to the regulatory floodplain downstream of the culvert due to this improvement. One of the key reasons we do this is the flood storage is not permanent. The long-term goal in most cases is to upsize the crossing to safely convey the 100-year flow. Also, the culverts and embankments are not typically designed to provide flood protection and can fail during a flood event. So we don't want to count on this protection. This approach helps ensure development and public infrastructure projects are designed with the ultimate condition in mind. Looking at the photos on this slide, the houses in the background are on the downstream side. Since the inadvertent flood storage was ignored in the hydrology, those homes built with appropriate freeboard above the BFE for the future improved crossing condition. This approach also limits mapping revisions necessary with culvert improvement projects, since there is no change to the regulatory hydrology. Therefore, in many cases, crossing structure improvement projects can be permitted based on a no-rise analysis instead of a CLOMR, which saves time and money. In summary, master planning is fundamental, and when combined with the policy to ignore the effects of inadvertent flood storage, this makes it much easier to quickly and effectively implement crossing structure improvement projects. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Brooke. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And our next presenter is Dakota Fisher. Dakota is a community planner with FEMA. And Dakota, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I know I should know this, but to put a finer point on it, I believe with the Risk Management Directorate, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
All right. Thank you. Take it away, Dakota.
Hi, folks. Yes, my name is Dakota Fisher. I am a community planner in the Risk Management Directorate. I'm located at FEMA headquarters. I'm even here today in Washington, D.C. with you all. And I am here to talk a little bit about the National Mitigation Planning Program. The entire intent behind why I'm here today and what I'd like to bring to this conversation with you all is I want to be able to provide an example of how our program can be beneficial to the professionals on this call, learning more about safety grades and mitigation efforts through the utilization and improvement of culverts. And so why is this important? Why am I here? What is the relevance? So climate change increases the frequency and the duration and intensity of natural hazards. And this includes wildfires, extreme heat drought, and of course, especially flood and flood events. Communities are feeling these impacts of a changing climate now more than ever. And the variations that are happening create new risks to state and local governments and challenges to pre-existing conditions. They also pose a unique threat to the nation's most at-risk populations by exacerbating impacts felt by disasters. And through our program, especially through recent updates to our program, which we'll get into in a moment, we have the opportunity to plan for the future, plan for the changing climate and the impacts of a changing climate, and to do so in a more equitable way, which is something we are emphasizing very much here at FEMA under this administration. So just a little bit about our program. Again, I'm here to talk about the National Mitigation Planning Program. Many of you know it simply as the FEMA Hazard Mitigation, as FEMA Hazard Mitigation Planning. My program's been around for quite a long time. For those of you who are not already aware, the Hazard Mitigation Planning Program has been around for over 2 decades. We are a national program, and we are representative of all 10 regions. We are staffed and we have representatives across those 10 regions, and that includes approximately 70 folks. We're currently going through a hiring flux, so that will be changing here soon, but we're around 70 strong in the Hazard Mitigation Planning Program. Since inception, the program has engaged with over 30,000 communities. as of September 30th of this year, the nation's population who live in communities with a current hazard mitigation plan is over 85%. When I say a current hazard mitigation plan, if you check out that asterisk under the 85%, this means they have a FEMA approved or a approvable pending adoption plan. In addition to that 85% number, 50 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 territories, including American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands have approved mitigation plans. Currently, or at least as of September 30th, 2022, a total of over 25,500 local governments have current mitigation plans, and 238 tribal governments of 574 federally recognized tribal nations also have approved or approvable pending adoption mitigation plans. It's a little bit of the basics. Our authority is rooted in what is known as 44 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 201, mitigation planning. You can also find it in Section 322 of the Stafford Act. The purpose of mitigation planning is for state, local, tribal, and territorial governments to identify the natural hazards that impact them, to identify actions and activities to reduce any losses from those hazards, and to establish a coordinated process to implement the plan, in this case, the hazard mitigation plan. The mitigation planning policies, of which there are 2 on the screen here in front of you, are FEMA's official interpretation of the Code of Federal Regulations. These FEMA policies are external, authoritative statements that articulate the agency's intent and direction to guide plan review and approvals. The state guide outlines the requirements for all states, DC, and those 5 US territories I mentioned earlier. The local guide focuses on the requirements for local governments. Our program recently updated both the state and local policies, with the release coming on April 19th of 2022 of this year. And the policies go into effect 1 year after release, meaning that the state and local policies, these new updates, will officially go into effect on April 19th, 2023. If you've been involved with the hazard mitigation planning process before, you may know of the documents on your screen as the state and local plan review guides. There is also a separate policy or guidance document for tribal mitigation. The Tribal Mitigation Plan Review Guide was published in 2017 and is still in effect today. There is a plan to update the tribal guide here in the next couple of years. And the policies, they provide a framework for a consistent plan review and approval. They explain what to include in a hazard mitigation plan to be best prepared, to be best able to facilitate that approval process. They do not necessarily say how to plan, though, or how to conduct planning. That is for the state, local, tribe, territory to decide what the planning process means for them to answer the charge of the program. For context, for those of you who are coming into this topic relatively new, it's a bit green for you. Creating a plan is only one step along what is the journey, the route to a more resilient community. But it is a stop nonetheless, right? It is an important piece of the puzzle that results in more resilient communities. The planning process, as you can see through this graphic, is pretty much the roadmap that you create to go through the many stops along the route to then get to what is a more resilient community. Through the process, a community can establish a plan and then course of actions through mitigative action for obtaining a more resilient outcome. I like to throw this slide in for folks because this tends to be what many people are most familiar with whenever you think of FEMA, the FEMA grant programs, right? And the plan is important because the plan provides a jumping off point to take mitigative action through the grant programs. Likely familiar for many of you, FEMA has a lot of grants, and even recently FEMA's the amount of money being put into some of these grants, especially programs like BRIC and the rehabilitation of high hazard potential dams, they're only increasing. More resources becoming available, going online. But it's very important for folks who aren't aware, and even good to reiterate for folks who are, that the hazard mitigation plan is a prerequisite for many of these grants. Why is all of this important, other than the obvious reason that I put forward to you all just a moment ago, that it's a prerequisite if you want to get some grant dollars, at least from FEMA? Well, mitigation is most successful when it starts with a long-term strategy and a mitigation plan that reflects the whole of the community. The whole community includes individuals and communities. It includes the private and nonprofit sectors, faith-based organizations, and all levels of government, including regional or metropolitan, state, local, tribal, territorial, insular areas, and other federal groups. Hazard mitigation planning, at least when done right, engages the whole of community in a process to understand risk from different perspectives, come up with a solution to reduce those risks, inclusive of the ideas and the experiences of all the members of a community, and then create an action plan to implement those solutions that all of the community can get behind. That doesn't just support the beliefs, the experiences, the intentions of a particular subset of the community. The purpose of mitigation planning is to identify policies and actions that can be implemented over the long term to reduce risk and future losses. And these mitigation policies and actions are identified based on an assessment of hazards, vulnerabilities, and risk. Those who are familiar with my program, those of you who are familiar with FEMA are very familiar with the risk assessment, right? Like that's one component that we are referring to when I say hazards, vulnerabilities, and risk, and the assessment of those things. The planning process incorporates the participation of a wide range of partners and the public, again, the whole of community, in the planning process. And this creates an open and inclusive dialogue that provides transparency and legitimacy to the decisions made during plan development. That way, whenever the plan is eventually taken off the shelf, something we all talk about, we don't want this document to just be a plan on the shelf. When it is taken off the shelf and it is used to inform the development of a program or a project with the desire to reduce risk, it can be vested by the community, validated by the community and the community's perspective. So what's your role? Why am I here talking to you all today? And more importantly, like, how do you get involved? Well, your role in the process is to be involved, to be aware that there is this process out there that has existed for over 20 years that is a planning process that can be utilized to, again, identify your risk, plan mitigative actions for that risk, and then also be eligible, be able to go after grant dollars, again, at least in the FEMA world, which is where I'm coming from today, to take action that's present in those plans that were developed. So connect with your emergency manager. I know many of you are either emergency managers, floodplain managers, you work in the emergency management offices, but for those of you who aren't, talk to the folks, talk to your emergency managers or the emergency management department in your locale. If in most cases, as that really colorful map showed at the beginning, in most cases, you all are already participating in this process or have participated in the past. You just have to go talk to somebody to become involved. And if there's that rare case where you are not currently involved, you do not have a current plan or even an expired plan, reach out to your state hazard mitigation officer, reach out to tribal hazard mitigation officers to get involved and to see what is needed to get your community involved. But bring your knowledge about the built environment, bring your experiences, support permitting, design, and grant writing, and integrate risk information and mitigation goals into other planning decisions. I believe I've already gone over time, so I don't want to go much longer. I'll just go ahead and shuffle through the last couple of slides and say, thank you all so much. It's my understanding we will send this information out to you, the participants, when we are done. I've got a handful of links and resources throughout this presentation. If you want to get more involved, if you have questions, put them in the QA. You can also just reach out to me directly. Here's my email. And yeah, I appreciate the time with you all. Appreciate the opportunity to present with my fellow panelists, and I'll hand it back to our hosts.
Yeah, thanks, Dakota. I really appreciate that. So as you say, we will make sure we get these those resources out to people after the fact. It'll take us about a week or so just to turn that around. But I did promise some Q&A, and we do have some time for that. So hopefully everyone can just see the question and discussion slide up on my screen. We have a few questions, and I'm just going to try and take them in the order that they were received. So without much further ado, Benjamin he had some comments and questions. So Benjamin is saying, our engineering and road department / public works manages several historic culverts. Should they be working to identify culverts that may pose a threat? Since I'm a planner and not working in the public works department directly, I'm trying to find out the best way to approach these departments and convey the problem in an as effective manner as possible. Is culvert safety well known by public works departments? I don't necessarily need a detailed answer, just curious what you think an appropriate approach might be.
Oh, this is the question. Yeah, how do we do this? How do we take the time to identify where these hazards are and do something about them? And I think the first part is awareness. You could share this presentation. I was thinking while we were presenting that we should really we need a page on our website to get out all the information that we have on this to help people share information, and maybe post the presentation there. And we would like to finalize that criteria probably before we do that, but I think just helping with awareness.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you so much, Holly. That makes a lot of sense. Moving on, we actually had a couple of questions come up about this, so I'm just going to sort of mash them together into one sort of direct question. But before I get to it, I noticed a few of you attending are sort of raising your hands and hopefully trying to weigh in that way. However, given the size of the audience here, we're just going to be taking questions via the Q&A. So if you have questions or comments and your hands up, if you could just drop those in the Q&A, we'll try and get to as many as we have time for. So the question that I was sort of referring to that came up a few times was the bars on the Mile High Safety Grate and their orientation vertically as opposed to horizontally with regard to people potentially being caught and self-rescuing. Would it make more sense to have them horizontally? And so people just wondering kind of about the orientation of that.
Yeah, this is a great question. And we did talk about this. We have heard from maintenance personnel that they really like, at least on the face of the grate, to have vertical bars, because maybe they reach down from the culvert opening and then they can just scrape debris up. And facilitating maintenance is really important, right? You know, if these are blocked, it's really problematic. So what about horizontal bars being helpful to someone climbing off of a grate? If you go back into the presentation, you'll see that on half of our grate that was in the flume, there were some horizontal bars behind the vertical bars. And we had the divers try both sides and provide their comments on that. They initially thought they would really like these horizontal bars. And based on their feedback, they thought this isn't really necessary. When the water's this high, it's not that hard to pull myself back. And if there's additional bars, it might just be an obstacle for me. So that's a great question.
Okay, thank you very much, Holly. Benjamin had another question. In states where barriers to fish passage, I knew I was going to mess that up, fish passage are prohibited, has there been any analysis of whether the Mile High Grate or flared entrances creates barriers to fish movement? Is safety kind of the only consideration there, or are there other considerations like the fish and wildlife components?
Yeah, we really just looked at safety in this study, and I don't feel qualified to comment on fish. I see I have trouble with it too. You're not alone.
Sure.
Passage.
Yeah.
Holly, wouldn't you say that in most cases, if you're designing a crossing on a stream that would require fish passage, it's going to meet those requirements of being short. You're going to be able to see daylight. It's large enough to go through. A lot of the examples you were showing are, wouldn't be designed for fish passage.
Yeah, that is what I would think. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for addressing that. I've got a question here from Shannon, and I apologize if you already touched on this in your presentation. I may have missed it, or this question doesn't fully make sense to me, but I'm going to ask it because it may ring a little bit more. Ring a bell for you, but have any efforts been made to merge or compare your research with that for BMPs and grate sizing? And I was getting hung up on the acronym BMP. I'm not a subject matter expert. I don't know what that is.
Oh, best management practice, water quality.
Sure.
Stormwater control measures. So I don't know if I might have a follow-up question on that. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, Shannon, if you wouldn't mind just elaborating, we'll try and take that one maybe in a little bit. Another question here from John. What future research will continue at CSU concerning the debris versus safety questions? So if there's any future research in the works or plans,
So
I'm just wondering what that might look like.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Well, I think the next step in context of what we just presented is to install a 30-inch culvert and recreate now physically what Frank showed in his model, so that we can see, is there just something that we need to investigate further numerically, or do we have a perfect storm here with this 30-inch culvert that we can evaluate? So we'll get it all set up and bring the dive team back and hopefully get some good pictures and video and feedback.
And to add on to that, our study did not look at the debris component, if that was part of your question.
Okay. Very good, thank you. So we're just gonna take a few more questions. I think we've got a few in here that makes sense. Karen's asking just sort of for a clarification about the spacing on some of the components here. So if the MHFD grates should be 12 inches out from the face of the culvert, should there be bars 5 inches apart on the 12-inch top shelf too, or not?
Yeah, hi Karen. So what we modeled was actually a solid platform. So you could do it with bars, although we modeled it solid, so it was not important from a standpoint of conveyance in that area of the grate.
Okay, great. So I want to give people an opportunity. We've got a couple other questions we may get to, but I just want to do a couple of other housekeeping things before we take any last minute questions from folks. So if you have anything else, please drop it in the Q&A and we can potentially take a couple more. However, for the time being, I want to do our last poll question, and it's a simple, if you could just rate this webinar, please. And while that's going on, I'm actually going to see if I can get the slide to advance here and just sort of remind everybody about certificates of attendance, continuing education credits, and so forth. So again, if you're a floodplain manager and you participated in the entire event today, you're eligible for 1 CEC. And if you're a national level CFM, we'll get that applied to your account within about a week or so. And if you need this credit for any other professional purposes, we're going to be sending you a certificate of attendance that you can use for that. So thank you all for weighing in just with the webinar rating. And let me get back to just check the Q&A to see if there's anything else.
Kevin, do you mind if I add something?
Please, by all means.
Okay, there was a question in Q&A about someone reaching out to emergency managers. And I mentioned the firefighter that drowned here. And after that happened, there was an organization that put together information specifically for first responders. And I'd be happy to pass that along if there's a way to do that to the group. Or you can reach out to me via email and I'll send it to you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for addressing that, Holly. I may have missed that. We'll take 2 more because I know we do have some time, and I just want to make sure we get to as many people as possible. So we have a question. Have you seen any local agencies adjust their design specifications in response to this information yet?
I have spoken with at least one that saw the ProPublica article. That's another resource I think it is good to share. And you can just Google search it and find it. Storm drains keep swallowing up people. So I've talked to at least one municipality that is reviewing, and they were in Texas, and I wish I could give them credit right now for that, but I don't recall what community it was. I apologize.
Sure, and then I'll ask Jennifer's question, and I'm not sure if we're going to have a fantastic answer, but I'm frankly just a little curious myself. So Jennifer is asking, all of the studies were related to entry near the pipe opening. Has there been any studies that you're aware of floating down a system and trying to exit the pipe? And Jennifer adds, I'm in Florida and I'm wondering about manatee grates and if they should be modified. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So I don't recall it. Most of the studies that we looked at, as far as where these hazards exist, it is so oftentimes that people do not intend to enter the water and they are accidentally get swept into the water. Or they are seeking shelter in a culvert, maybe a box culvert. So I don't recall seeing any where people were, floating down a system.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for trying to take a stab at it. So I think we'll wrap up there just a couple of minutes early. As you can see, if you have any suggestions for topics, you can send them to Alan. I think I covered just about everything else. Thank you so much to all our presenters for taking the time out of their schedules to present to us today. And thank you all for participating and listening in as well. I hope you have a great rest of your day and take care, everybody. Take care.